Hello and welcome. I'm going to talk to you today about polio and how it was all but eradicated throughout the world. For my sake and that of my children, I am happy for that. Throughout history, humans have been under siege from pathogens in an arms race. Some pathogens live happily in symbiosis with us. Others seek out our death or disability. Unearthed bones in China show signs of a plague that happened about 3000 BC. In AD 165, a plague, thought to be smallpox, killed over 5 million people in the Roman Empire. In AD 541, as many as 10% of the world's population died of bubonic plague. In 1346, the Black Death wiped out half the population of Europe. The only defence a person had was their natural immunity, perhaps luck as well. That was until Edward Jenner reasoned that the milder cowpox inferred immunity to smallpox in milkmaids. So sure was he that in 1796 he inoculated a 13-year-old boy with the cowpox virus contained in pus. Can you imagine how outrageous this would have been? Yet, 200 years earlier, the Chinese were smearing cowpox pus into wounds to obtain immunity to smallpox. Through a worldwide campaign, smallpox was eradicated in 1980. I want you to put your hand on your upper left arm. Chances are you carry the scar of a smallpox vaccination if you're about my age. Now we turn to that scourge, polio. If you are 60 years plus of age, you would have lived through a period when prevention from catching polio involved social isolation of infected individuals and disinfection of anything that could be touched, as well as strict hygiene. Does this sound familiar? Polio is very contagious and the virus is transmitted by droplets or exposure to feces of an infected person. It mainly affects children under 5 years of age. 72% of infected people will have no symptoms, so carry on spreading. 25% will have flu-like symptoms, 0.5% will develop paralysis, and of those many will die. Children who seem to fully recover can develop post-polio syndrome 15 to 40 years later. Following the introduction of polio vaccine in the 1950s, the last case of locally acquired polio in Australia was in 1972. Australia was declared polio-free in the year 2000. However, polio still does exist in other parts of the world and cases continued to be reported in Pakistan, Afghanistan and Nigeria. As long as a single child remains infected, children in all countries are at risk of contracting polio. Failure to eradicate polio from these last remaining strongholds could result in as many as 200,000 new cases every year, within 10 years all over the world. There is no cure for polio, it can only be prevented. Polio was known in Australia in the late 1800s, but the worst epidemics took place in the 20th century. From 1944 to 1954, polio was responsible for more than 1,000 deaths in Australia. In America in the 1950s, polio killed or paralysed tens of thousands of people. In the early 20th century, suffering from polio was considered shameful and was associated with dirt and poverty. It is contracted from water, food or objects that have been in contact with faeces or mucus of an infected person. In Australia at this time, inadequate sanitation and poor understanding of disease transmission meant that anyone could catch it, but the urban poor, rural communities with poor sanitation and children who put things in their mouths were at greater risk. Before the Whitlam government's national sewage program in the 1970s, hundreds of thousands of homes, poor and affluent alike, were not connected to sewers. This was despite the fact that in the 1950s Australian governments knew that polio was faeces-borne. Outbreaks of polio usually occurred in summer, terrifying communities and causing public hysteria. Swimming pools, theatres and cinemas were closed and people avoided large gatherings. Then the standard treatment for polio patients was immobilisation of the affected limbs. In 1932, Queensland nurse Sister Elizabeth Kenny rejected immobilisation as a means of rehabilitation and began treating the physical effects of polio using warm compresses and massage. Such was the popularity of her treatments that Sister Kenny clinics opened around Australia and in England. She also spent 11 years in the United States. Her treatment is considered the forerunner of modern physiotherapy. When the muscles of the chest were involved, a person was placed in an iron lung. The longest surviving polio patient confined in an iron lung was June Middleton, who died in 2009 at the age of 83 in Melbourne. She had spent 60 years living like that. In 1955, Dr. Jonas Salk and his research team at the University of Pittsburgh in the United States developed the first polio vaccine, which was administered by injection. The idea of injecting weakened pathogen to produce antibodies was not new. Cowpox proved that. Salk's success was in isolating the virus and finding how to render it inactive. He refused to patent his processes, which has been estimated would have been worth $7 billion in those days. In 1961, an oral vaccine was developed by Dr. Albert Sabin. Debate raged over the benefits of the two kinds of vaccine. Salk's vaccine, which used to kill the virus, was easier and quicker to produce but required regular booster shots. Sabin's attenuated virus vaccine did not require booster shots but, if not manufactured properly, ran the risk of reverting to its virulent state and infecting the person with the full-blown disease. It worked by preventing the virus from replicating in the patient's intestines and so stopped the ongoing transmission of the disease. It is estimated that the Sabin and Salk vaccines together save an estimated 600,000 lives each year worldwide. Dr. Percival Bazley of the Commonwealth Serum Laboratories was sent to work with Salk in 1952 and returned to Melbourne in 1955 to begin manufacturing the deadly virus vaccine. The first Salk vaccines were distributed across Australia in June 1956 and 25 million doses of the vaccine were produced by CSL under his directorship. Many parents were enthusiastic about the vaccine, but by no means all. By 1964, 83% of New South Wales children were vaccinated, but only 72% of children in Victoria. These vaccination rates were not high enough. The eradication of a disease relies on herd immunity, which occurs when the vaccination of a significant proportion of a population provides protection for individuals who have not developed immunity. The lack of herd immunity contributed another outbreak of polio in Australia in 1961 and 1962. Sabin's oral vaccine was first used in Australia in 1966. But how to administer a vaccine, Salk or Sabin, to those most in need of protection, namely children? Well, school vaccinations. Do you remember lining up at school to receive your jab? Do you remember if they changed the needle from one child to the next? Previously, in 1932, school-based programs delivered diphtheria tetanus toxoid in the 1940s onwards, BCG vaccine in the 1970s, rubella to schoolgirls in 1998, hepatitis B and measles in 2003, meningococcal C in 2005, chickenpox, and in 2007, the human papilloma virus. Chances are you have never heard of a person contracting these diseases in Australia. Back to Western Australia in 1966. Getting polio vaccine to school children throughout the state was accomplished with a visiting nurse bringing vaccine. The job wasn't done until all children were vaccinated, and that included children living remotely. But how to do that? 26-year-old nurse and pilot Robin Miller had trained as a nurse at Royal Perth Hospital and King Edward, then worked as a surgery nurse for Dr. Harold Dix. Newly qualified Dr. Dix had been the only doctor serving the area north of Carnarvon, as he was a pilot also. He supported Robin's negotiation with the West Australian Commission of Health to carry out a mass immunisation program in the outback using oral Sabin vaccine administered on sugar cubes. She would be paid 20 cents per mile flown. 37,000 doses would be administered over an area equal to half the state. 450 smaller settlements, mining camps and Aboriginal communities were not going to miss out. Sabin didn't need refrigeration, unlike Salk vaccine. She replaced her Cessna 182 with a faster Mooney M20, and a similar aircraft can be seen today on a stand opposite the Royal Flying Doctor Service in Jandakot Airport. Dr. Dix married Robin in 1973. Robin became a Royal Flying Doctor pilot flying the Cessna 421 and Cessna Citation. In 1975, aged just 35, Robin died of cancer. In October 2000, the World Health Organization declared the Western Pacific region, which includes Australia, to be polio-free. There are an estimated 400,000 polio survivors in Australia, many of whom still live with the long-term effects of the disease. Thank you for watching. Stay safe. Please like and subscribe.